Now that night begins with sable wings to overcloud the brightness of the sun, and that in darkness pleasures may be done, come, booktubers, let us to the bower, and there in safety pass a pleasant hour. Actually, no, that's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is the Spanish Tragedy by Thomas Kyd. This is contemporary of Shakespeare, and in honor of, in September, Shaketober takes place, where the totally great booktubers, totally pretentious Lukash, Old Blues Chapter and Verse Jason, and Steve Donahue are hosting Shaketober, where they read the plays of Shakespeare. And in the warm-up run-up to that, I am reading Shakespeare's contemporaries, and I've selected the plays. I've got my little list down below. And we're starting off this week with The Spanish Tragedy by Thomas Kyd. Thomas Kyd, baptized, because, dates and all that are pretty fuzzy at this point, baptized in London in 1558 and buried August 15th, 1594 at the age of 36, is a contemporary of Shakespeare. Shakespeare was born in 1564, died in 1616 at the ripe old age of 52. I can still say that. I'm still slightly skitch underneath of that old man Shakespeare. So Thomas Kyd was probably arguably far more popular than Shakespeare in his time. The Spanish Tragedy, the only play that's actually attributed to him that survives, that's securely attributed to him that survives, was written sort of 1582 to 1592. I think 1592 is when it was actually, they have records of it actually first being performed, and is considered the first example of Elizabethan revenge tragedy. Of course, Kyd seems to be taking a lot of his ideas from the Roman playwright Seneca, though from what I've read about the plays of Seneca, they're very much kind of reporting on the bloodshed, the mayhem, where Thomas Kyd very much is dramatizing that bloodshed and mayhem and the ideas of revenge we will be getting into. So yes. There's a whole big, I've kind of did a big whole synopsizing of the play. That would take too long. You can read a synopsis of the play online. For the purposes of me just talking about the play today, we open up with a ghost who wants revenge, and luckily we have the personification. We have a character called Revenge accompanying him on stage, and he wants revenge. He wants to see revenge of the guy who killed him, a Portuguese prince called Balthazar. And in the ensuing fun of this play, because it is bloody fun, it is raw, visceral bloodshed. The ghost in life, Andrea, loved Bel-imperia, and in the course of the play, his Bel-imperia's brother ends up brutally killing her lover, the ghost's friend, which the ghost complains about. This isn't what I came to see. I came to see Balthazar got killed. At the very beginning of the play, the ghost promises that Bel-imperia will kill Balthazar by the end, and indeed that does, and the ghost is not lying. So yes, but the brother brutally kills the lover of Bel-imperia, the new lover of Bel-imperia, Horatio, which kind of really at that point ramps up who becomes sort of the main protagonist of the play, if there is a main protagonist, which is Horatio's father, Hieronymo. And Hieronymo seems to be one of these kind of great roles of the Elizabethan time. It gets talked about as one of the great roles. Burrage, I think, is one of the guys who's like, yes, this is one of my great roles, up there with Hamlet coming in only first to it. And Hieronymo plots his revenge. Horatio's mother, Isabel, goes mad, very much in a similar way, you could say, to someone like Ophelia. Hieronymo plots his revenge, and it all hinges on a play, which might also sound familiar from Hamlet. He comes up with a kind of a play within the play to enact his revenge. And indeed, all through this, the actual play, we have the ghost complaining. It's like, I haven't got my revenge yet. I haven't gotten my revenge yet. We haven't gotten thing. And by the end, needless to say, this is a Elizabethan revenge tragedy. The ghost is happy at the end. The ghost is very happy at the end, and the stage is awash with blood. So that is a very kind of a general rough overview of the play. I'm going to try and not make this a half an hour video. I can't be, actually. I have to leave soon. So yes, obviously, the major theme of this play is revenge. Revenge! I just love saying that word. And you can see that, how this is going to wash into something like with Shakespeare, Titus Andronicus, where Shakespeare, probably you can see him being like, okay, I'm going to write a exciting blockbuster like what this was, where there is lots of bloody revenge. And then as he kind of matures or gets more complicated in his themes and stuff, you get something like Hamlet, where you can really see that like a lot of the kind of concepts and ideas in the Spanish tragedy are then taken and kind of made more complex and more difficult and more troubling in something like Hamlet, which is obviously it's the masterpiece. I mean, I'm not going to go on and on about how Shakespeare is so awesome and Kyd can suck it. It's like, no, actually, this is an exciting, energetic play, and I can see why this was popular in its time, and indeed, you can see why this kind of revenge stuff really still does tap into that kind of stuff. There's also just sort of the ideas of revenge, justice versus revenge, of which actually in this play, it's funny because Geronimo, he tries to go to the king to kind of get justice for the horrible murder that has happened to him, but he gets kind of brushed off. But it's very kind of like, oh yeah, he tried. Okay, yeah, now we can get on to the revenge part of the play. So it seems a little bit light that way. We're not getting that like, wow, the system failed him, even though that seems to be the implication. Perhaps that is something maybe of the times, there was a lot of injustice at the time, and that could just get taken as spoken. People at the time are like, oh yeah, we already know you can't really get justice. You have to do your own thing. So there's justice versus revenge. There's also law versus justice versus revenge. Geronimo, in his duties as a man in this society, is a judge, and indeed there's what's almost a comic scene where his sorrow over his son's murder and his kind of thirst for revenge sort of makes him a bad judge, makes him a bad investigator. He fails to learn important information because he didn't stop and be a good judge, and the person who he's supposed to be judging just gets hung without getting properly questioned. So yeah, we get that. Looking just, the Wikipedia scholar that I am, the idea is that actually in Elizabethan time, they didn't, there were duels, but for the most part, people did not look kindly upon people enacting revenge in their society. People who murdered somebody else for murdering someone they cared about would get dealt with equally as harsh. And there's some parts of this play where you can kind of see that it's like, yes, we're going to indulge in that kind of bloodthirstiness, but the revengers don't get rewarded at the end. There is something about kind of like the theme of audience participation, and this also using the kind of the play within the play thing. At the end of each act, we have the ghost going, when am I going to get my revenge? When am I going to get my revenge? Which totally reminds me of like a horror movie guy going like, well, when are we going to get our first kill? When are we you got to get your first kill in there, or else it's like, this is a boring movie. Or, a revenge thing. It's like, you got to start murdering people. You get a certain amount of buildup, but it's like, I want my murder. It's like, there's that very visceral, bloodthirsty side of human beings, which often comes out in our entertainments, in our escapist entertainments. And there's a part of this you might think it's an escapist thing of like, oh, something horrible's been done, and I get this fantasy of a father, getting to blood, enact bloody murder on thing. It's interesting that, that's the very masculine thing. There's an interesting thing of that in this play, you have the murdered son Horatio's mother, Isabella, probably because this is in Spain, where she ends up going to the scene of where this garden where her son was killed, and it's like she rips and she chops down the entire garden, and it's like it's fruitless, it's barren, and I'm gonna stab the breast that sucked poor Horatio. It's like it's that very much that thing of female anger getting turned inwards, where male anger kind of explodes out, which is an interesting little note that, like, even in Elizabethan times, that was very much a thing. While we're talking about female characters, Bel-imperia is actually an interesting character in this play, in that she has various lovers. She was in love with the Ghost Andrea when he was alive, apparently against her father's wishes. She's in love with Horatio, who then gets murdered. She doesn't have much luck with her lovers, and like Balthazar is wooing her and wants to marry her, and indeed that is the approved marriage. This is going to actually cause a great uniting of Spain and Portugal after having the conflict at the events leading up to the start of the play. So she's presented as, but she's not kind of slut shamed, I guess, for a better word. She's like, yeah, she had various lovers, but she's not like, she doesn't have to be either the paragon of virtue and chastity, or the what's it, Madonna whore sort of is how it's framed. She's actually a complex woman in there, and indeed at the end of the play, she's not a victim. She is an actor of the revenge, which is an interesting thing. I don't know if you even get that in Shakespeare so much. I mean, you get someone like Lady Macbeth who's pulling the strings behind the thing, but it's like Bel-imperia is actually there at the beginning. This isn't that I'm saying that Bel-imperia is more complex or more interesting character. It's just that it's an interesting note of like just that active note in this play. So because people are another thing to kind of I want to look at, I guess, is like, oh, people say, oh, Shakespeare is of his time, so of course women could only do certain amount of activities or something like that on stage, or could be imagined that way. And it's interesting that in this play by a contemporary, we have an active woman who wants her revenge and indeed participates and enacts that revenge in the end. So there's going back to that kind of idea of audience participation and us wanting the revenge. There's also the use of a lot of times of dramatic irony that like the audience knows is in on the joke, but the characters aren't. And there's this very funny part, also kind of very brutal part, where a servant gets betrayed by a joke by the kind of the villain of the piece, Lorenzo, the brother of Bel-imperia, and the page, who also knows, because Lorenzo gives him a box and says, yeah, show him this box, tell him there's a pardon in there. And the page, of course, when he gets upset, well, I wouldn't have looked inside the box, but he told me I couldn't, so I'll look inside and it's empty. And he goes, oh, that's kind of a funny joke, isn't it? He'll think that there's a pardon and he'll strut in front of the court, which is Geronimo, and say, ha, you can't touch me, when actually, in fact, it's an empty box. And indeed, at the end, he's like, yeah, the servant's like, yeah, you can't touch me, you can't do anything. And it's like, with the stage directions, you can very much see the stage is like, oh, you think this is going to protect you? The hangman's like, great, I'll put it underneath, string you up, kick the box out from underneath, and you die. And it's like, that's a joke that the audience is, we are brought in on the joke. We are co-conspirators on the joke. And there's very much that thing with revenge plays. It's like, we're getting in on the revenge. We get to vicariously participate in it, which makes for a very kind of uncomfortable viewing. when you find yourself getting caught up in it, like, that's a good joke. Oh, that guy's hung. That guy's been hung to death. And I'm laughing. And, you think about that. It's like, oh, yeah, I feel kind of crappy about myself. But that's actually, there is that bloodthirsty thing. And I think anybody who is a fan of modern movies and action and all that violence, it's like we're getting that kind of vicarious thrills. And this is definitely one of the earliest examples of, let's put this in front of you and invest you in it and get you in on the joke. And you can see how someone like Shakespeare took up a lot of this stuff. Probably took up sort of just the zeitgeist of the time. I mean, this is a time where writers got in trouble for what they wrote, so they set it in foreign countries and they put it in the godless hands of the Roman Catholics, which we can go into, but because this interesting little context thing here is that I think 1588 is when the Spanish Armada failed to invade England, maybe because England repelled them, maybe because of really horrible weather. But so they were very much the enemy, and they were the giant world power, where England was much humbler. And indeed, it's an English playwright, so you have to have scenes in here where England gets pumped up as this. It's like, well, we shouldn't feel bad about conquering each other, because we've also been ill-used by the English. The English have defeated us many times. It's like, thanks, English playwright. You English guys are just awesome. So yeah, that's what I have to say, I guess, on the Spanish tragedy. We'll just start off. I think I'll end off with just the sad note of Thomas Kyd's death, which kind of leads nicely into next week, where Thomas Kyd roomies with Christopher Marlowe. Unfortunately, that association didn't go well for him. Thomas Kyd was then arrested in suspicion of kind of various stuff. They found what they considered heretical works in his possession, which he claimed were Thomas Marlowe's. And he was arrested and tortured. Arrested briefly, but was tortured. And this is a society where, you'd get scooped up by the state and you'd get tortured for a while. That was the fun kind of backdrop of, like, you think of, I look at all the physical harm that happens in this play, and it's like, and it's written in a time where the state was quite capable of arresting people and torturing them. A year after he was released, having published a couple of things, including some comments about how, the basic suffering, he died at the age of 36. So with that said, we'll go on to his roomie. Yes, Christopher Marlowe next week, with Dr. Faustus. Yes. Can't wait for that. Also, Lukash has, of Totally Pretentious, has released his schedule for Shaketober. So even if you're not interested in Shakespeare's contemporaries, but you are interested in Shakespeare, they will be. I will put a link down below to his announcement video, and probably by the time I get this up, I may have the other two fellows their lists of what Shakespearean plays we can look forward to in September. But if you're interested, I'll be back here next Sunday for Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe, and continuing on after that. More videos later.